Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our webinar on building data-bound applications with App Builder. A couple important URLs before we get started. We've got a link to a trial version here. It'll be pasted into the chat, as well as a playlist on YouTube. There's a lot of good videos up there, so take a look at those if you're new to the product, and you'll learn a lot, and then you'll learn a lot today as well. You're gonna see today how to get to these pages and walk through the login and then creating applications with App Builder. So you'll also experience the product throughout the webinar today. So my name is Jason. I'm a Senior VP at Infragistics. I've been with the company for almost 20 years now. My email, jasonb@infragistics.com. And with me as well as Luke. He's our Regional Manager for Australasia. So if you have any questions that come out of this webinar about this product or any Infragistics products, please give us a email or give us a call or whatever. We'd love to chat with you. So today's agenda, App Builder overview, a real quick overview of App Builder, and then the rest we're just going to spend doing demos of the product and see how you can add data to the product. A little housekeeping, ask questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'll be on the chat and Q&A as well as Luke, and we'll follow up with an email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording, so you'll have access to that as well. And then upcoming webinars, May 25th, we're going to do a webinar about dashboard and BI and JavaScript apps. That's going to focus on a product we have called Reveal, which allows you to embed self-service dashboards into your applications, which is really slick. And then June 8th, we're going to talk about Angular and Angular data grids and go through maybe a little bit of App Builder, but also just how to use the data grid, how to use the CLI in Angular, and how to build all this stuff out. Use the chat today as well if you're interested in specific topics you'd like to see in these webinars. We're trying to do them as often as possible, and we want to hear from you on what you like, what you don't like, and all of that good stuff. So here is the idea around App Builder. We want you to design and build apps blazing fast. If you think back to Windows Forms or even VB6 based on the type of development you do, you know that a WYSIWYG drag and drop experience is the best and fastest way to get that tedious user interface part out of the way. That's what App Builder is all about. What we've done is we've built this IDE in the cloud, drag and drop, and it helps digital product teams build and deliver apps faster than ever. So all of that hand HTML, CSS coding that you thought you might need to do, we're doing all of that throughout the App Builder, through the drag and drop experience. So think about that in terms of how much time that actually does save you when you're building out these experiences. And really, it's supposed to be fun to build apps, not boring and tedious and just exhausting. And a lot of that hand coding is. So we want to take all that away and just make it easier for you. And the reason we did this is because digital product teams need to be more productive. 60% based on surveys from Gartner and Forrester. We know that 60% of app dev time is spent on the UI. This means that you are spending a lot of time and effort designing the user interface. That's where a lot of bugs are introduced and a lot of time spent after you deploy fixing those issues. And we also know layout and CSS on the web are really hard and difficult, especially coming from Windows Forms or WPF background. So if you're going through some digital transformation at your company and all of a sudden you have to do a Blazor application or an Angular application, that usually scares people. You're like, wait a minute, how am I supposed to learn all this technology? Well, App Builder will help you alleviate all of that hard stuff. You can focus on the code, which is the domain expertise that you have to build these applications, and then let App Builder build out the user interface, and then you take that and you wire up the data access, authentication, authorization, maybe some domain-specific code that your application needs, and then you're done. So our goal is to really remove that complexity from you with this nice WYSIWYG drag and drop. And if you're thinking about the future, Forrester and Gartner both have a bunch of papers out. These are the big analysts that cover tech. And they're saying, hey, by 2025, over 40% of app dev time will be done using low-code tools. So App Builder is a low-code tool. This means that your job is safe. You don't have to worry about App Builder doing all of the code. We are focused on the front end. You do have to write code after you build out your user experience. We're just removing a bunch of that tedious hard work. We can save up to 80% of your time. We've done a bunch of surveys. We've talked to a lot of customers. We've had products in the market like this for years. And based on all of that, we know the time savings you get is incredible when you can alleviate that type of manual hand coding. And the cool thing about App Builder, and this is our third bullet here, is that it's backed by a design system. So for example, we have UI kits in Adobe XD, Sketch, Figma coming soon. We're actually working on that right now. And all of those UI kit components are backed up by real controls. So we have UI controls and components for Angular, Blazor, React, web components. And this tooling sits in the middle. So the toolbox of App Builder marries all of this together. So anything maybe that your design team designs will automatically translate into real code. If you don't have a design team, which we know like 60-70% of developers don't work with a design team, no problem. Just use the toolbox, drag and drop your experience, or maybe start with one of the templates that you'll see today, and you can build out your applications much simpler and much faster. So with that, let's get to a demo. So I have a couple links here that I'm going to paste into the chat as well. I'm going to show data binding today. I also have videos online that I did around doing master detail apps. So one of the things that the App Builder doesn't do yet, it will soon, is wire up all of your components together for like master detail scenarios. So maybe a list and then a grid, and you're doing automatic filtering. You still have to write that code. We're adding that capability into it through REST APIs and things like that. But I do have videos on how you can take your code and do that for Angular and Blazor. Those are what those links are all about. So with that, let's go ahead, and I am going to open up my browser. And where we start is at infragistics.com. So once you're at infragistics.com, you can go over to Design and Development and then click the App Builder link on the top of the page. And then you end up at the App Builder homepage. You can read all about the App Builder and all of its capabilities and features on this page. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to click Sign In, and this takes me into the App Builder. I had already signed in before. If I sign out, let it go ahead and sign out, you'll see we have a few login options for you: Google, Microsoft, Apple, or your Infragistics ID. I'll go ahead and click Sign In. And it's going off, checking my validation, and here I am inside the App Builder. So you end up at this home page, which is sort of like your workbench, where you have all of the applications that you've been working on. And on the left-hand side, you've got Workspaces. Workspaces are how you share applications with your team, or you might be working on a specific project with multiple folks. So for example, Excel2JSON is an app I'm going to show you today, and it's got a bunch of people in the workspace. So to create a workspace, you just click plus, add a workspace, and then you add users, and then you go from there. Today, I'm just going to use my projects, and the first thing I'm going to do is click New App. On the New App screen, we've just introduced some new templates here, which is actually really nice. So when you're building an application, 9 times out of 10, you have a common layout that maps to one of these templates. What we did is we looked at hundreds of screens from customers and online and came up with these templates, which really kind of boil down to the shell experience that you get with an app. If you're just really learning and you want to explore, we have some cool sample apps here that you can just open up and start exploring on how they were built and all that good stuff. And in fact, if I just click Try Sample on this team collaboration app, you'll get an idea here. These are single page applications. So I've got a master view with child views. And within this child view, I've got all of my UI controls. And you can see that as I select items on my screen, I have property editors on the right-hand side. I've got my DOM layout on the left-hand side. And for features like a list control, for example, they can be data bound or not data bound. And today we're going to talk about how to make these things data bound. So if I go to my master view here, you'll see we've got a left nav. So this is a nav bar component, a navigation drawer actually. What I'm going to do, because we're already here, I'll just go ahead and click plus on master view, and I'm going to add a child view. And I'm going to call this my data bound view, I guess, just to be simple. And now what you can do is pick a layout. So of course your applications all have certain types of layouts. left nav and master details or top and bottom or whatever, if I click pick layout, you can see we have some nice options here for what we want to do. What I'm going to do, just since we're starting from scratch on how to do data binding, I'm going to click done and not pick anything. I'm going to go to my components toolbox. I'm going to search for a grid, and I'm going to drag and drop a grid onto the screen. So here I've got my grid control, and you can see we have some dummy data in the grid. So the way that data binding works inside of the app builder is data bound controls have on the right hand side a property editor where they're either static or data bound. In the case of a grid, you can select from data sources that you actually add to the app builder. So in this case, you can see I have a bunch of different data sources here. If I take this guy called JSON Northwind Customers and click Customers, you can see that the grid lights up with my customer's view. What I want to do is make this grid the full size of the screen. So I am going to tell it to grow like so and shrink. That's fine. Now I've got the grid, I've got my scroll bar, and the way the app builder works is if I click preview here, I can see a live preview of the running application, so I can actually interact with this and sort of work with it just like I would if I was running the app, as an application. The other thing I can do is switch between screens to look at other screens if I'd like. And what you'll notice here on the right hand side is that there's code being shown, a code view of the screen that I'm actually looking at. So in this case, I've got a grid, and that's the code. I got some TypeScript here. It's calling get customers, so it's subscribing to a service in my application. And then I've got some CSS here. And if I go to a screen that's a little bit more complicated, like my tasks, you can see there's a lot more HTML, not so much TypeScript, because that control actually, or that screen doesn't have any data binding, but a lot of layout for CSS. So we're taking all this out of your hands and doing it ourselves. So if I go back to edit, how does data actually get into this control? So if you go to the left-hand side, you're going to see you've got the data tab, and I have a bunch of data sources here. Since this is the web, you need to have a RESTful API or some sort of URL from the web, JSON, whatever, however you're pushing your data out, which would most likely be some sort of a web API. So I get questions like, hey, we want to connect to SQL Server. That's great. SQL Server needs to be fronted by something that's accessed through HTTP, like a REST API. So I'm going to show you a couple things here. The first one is a tool we have called Excel2JSON. And what that does is it'll create a cloud-based data source for you based on an Excel file. So I am going to click Browse My Computer, and I've got an Excel file here with a customer list from Microsoft Excel. And what this does is it loads it up into this app, and this is an app that we built. And I'm going to say customers demo list and hit enter. And what I can do now is click save file or download JSON. So if I download JSON, I can get this file and upload it to App Builder, or when I click save file, it actually saves it to my files and gives me a URL that I can use inside of App Builder. So I'm going to click copy, and just so you can see what this looks like, I'm going to paste it in here, and there is all of the JSON that I can then consume inside of the App Builder. So let's go ahead and add a new data source, a REST API. I'm going to add a URL, and I'm going to say demo. Oh, sorry, I got to add my URL. That's not the name. I'm going to add my URL, click done. And actually here I want to say demo data source, like so. I'm going to say now the next step in this wizard is to select my data. I'm going to say select all. You can see here that there's a little confusion on postal code. This is actually coming across as JSON, so it doesn't really know what the data type is. We are adding a feature probably tomorrow that will let you pick if it's a string, a number, or whatever. I'm going to give this a new name, customers demo list, and hit enter. And I'm going to click done. So now over in my data sources, there's my demo data source, and this is my customer demo list that I just added. Now if I go back to my grid properties, there's demo data source, customers data list, and now it's just using that specific data source, which happens to be the Northwind customers, and that's why it looks the same. It didn't actually update. But that's the idea. I can add a data source and I can use that in controls that are on from the toolbox through the data properties. So now if I go back to my master view here, I'm going to click plus. Oh, actually, no, I don't want to do a new master view. I'm going to delete that guy. I'm going to add a new child view. And we will add a child view here. And we'll just call this another page, like so. And I'm going to pick a new layout because I want to show you a few other controls in how they work. So let's pick a layout like this would be a side pane with split content. And I like that. So let's go ahead and do that. And that's done. So now I'm going to add controls to each one of these. So the first thing I want to do here is add a list control. So I am going to go to components. I'm going to type in list. And here's my list. So I'm going to drag and drop the list here. Now I want this to be data bound. You go over to the right hand. You'll see how should this repeat? This should repeat in a data bound mode. And I'm going to pick one of my data sources. So I've got customers, orders, etc. We can go back to our demo data source, and I'm going to do customer data list. And then the count here, we limit it in case you have thousands of records. I'm going to hit delete, and I know that this is whatever, 30 rows or something like that. And then what I also want to do is if I preview this, you'll notice it's just going to make the page scroll really long. I'm going to click edit, and I want to go to the column layout that is the container for that list. So you can see in my DOM here, there's the list, there's the column layout. And I'm going to tell the overflow to go to auto. So that's a CSS thing. And now I get a scroll bar. Really nice. So now let's go back to our list and let's set some data binding properties. I'm going to set the title to the company name, and the subtitle is going to be the contact name. There we go. So now I'll hit preview, and I've got my list of all the folks that are in the customers table. So I'll go back and click edit. Now in this table, I don't have a URL. In the employees table I do, so there's going to be no image there. But in that case, if I click this image avatar, you can see that you've got the ability to set properties on it. So I can say it's square, circle. I can say I want this to be an image. If it's an image, should it be data bound? And you'll see I don't have any URLs here, so I really can't bind it to anything. But I can pick an image from my my assets that are part of this project, or actually part of this workspace. So if I go over to the left, I've got image assets here I can upload or whatever. Doesn't look as cool without multiple people's faces, but that's okay. We don't need it. But actually, you know what? Let's go back, and I will very quickly go to my list. And if I do change this, let's say to employees, and now employees, I will do the data binding for my last name, and let's do first name. Let's click the image. I am going to data bind this to the avatar URL, and now you'll see that I have all my URLs. So kind of a split decision there, a fast decision I made, but look at how easy it was to just rebind this list just like that. So now let's go ahead and add a grid up here. So I'm going to do, actually we're not going to do a grid. Let's do a card view, because that's another cool data bound control. So instead of going to the toolbox, once you get familiar with the product, you can just hit Control E, and I'm going to type in card, and now card shows up. And now for the card, let's go ahead and add another data source to this, and I'm going to add something from the cloud, and this will be my customers data. So this is another JSON object. My underlying container, I want this thing to wrap, and I want it to show scroll bars for auto. And then at the same time, let's get rid of that so we have all of our data. And let's do some data binding. So I'm going to click my little connect here, and we'll do company name. For the subtitle, we'll do contact name. For the body, we will find another field which will be cool, like country, for example. And then on this card view itself, I don't want some of these other things. So can I get rid of actions? Yep, I just want this to display like so. So now when I run this, you'll see that I've got data bound list, data bound card. And now for the last thing, let's go ahead and add a grid. For the grid, what I want to show you is the other way to get data into the app builder, and that's through something called Swagger. So the OpenAPI specification is a way that you can turn your functions that are working with data into web APIs that are accessible through this user interface called Swagger. So if you do a search for Swagger or OpenAPI, you'll learn all about it, and it has some really nice benefits to make it real easy for you to expose your data. So in this case, I've created something based on an Azure database in the cloud, and I put a front end on it with Swagger, which happened automatically because of .NET 6. It kind of does it for me, but it allows me to access data. So here I'll look at my customers, I'll click try it out, I'll click execute, and now you can see here this is my data coming from Azure SQL database from the cloud, which is really, really slick. So what I need is this URL, like so. Do Control C, and I'm going to go back to App Builder, and I'm going to go back to my data source, and I'm going to click a new one, REST API. We'll do Open API webinar, and I'm going to add an Open API URL. So I'll paste this guy in, done. And what you'll notice when I click configure endpoints is this has all of the endpoints that are listed in the Swagger UI. So if I go back to App Builder, you'll see everything is right here. This does not have authorization authentication. I'm going to do a video on if you wanted to add it, but you can add, keys, user ID, password, etc. if you need that on your data source. So let's click customers, and I'm going to click send, and you can see that this actually went off to the server, and here's a little preview of the data that should come back. I'm going to click this checkbox because that's the fields that I want. In fact, I can click others, like I can do orders or order details extended, and then I can select data. So now on this screen, I can just simply do select all to get all of the fields for these guys. You'll see orders has 46 fields, details extended 8 fields. It's really whatever I want. I'm going to click done, and here I am going to do a Control E. I am going to type in grid. So let's grab a grid. I am going to make this grid take up all of the space that I have here for my column layout, and I want this grid to grow and shrink, and the data source should come from the cloud. And let's do orders. So this is the orders table that I have, and if I click preview, and there's a lot of orders, I think there's like thousands of orders there. So there you go, we've got everything that we need in the control. So I've made this screen, it looks beautiful. What I want to do now is go back to edit, and I want to display or route to these screens, navigate to these screens from my master view. So if I go to the master view, I've got these buttons here, and you'll notice on the lower right I've got interactions, on click, do something. So for that first button, on click, navigate to my tasks. So I want to go to the third button, and I'm going to say add an interaction, navigate to master view, data bound view. Actually, yep, that's correct. So we're going to do data bound view, and then this last this button, interactions, navigate to, pick a view, another page, like so. So now if I go to my master view, I click preview, all of my click events work nicely, like so. And just like that, I'm adding screens. I don't have to write any code, and they all work perfectly. So what do you do next? I've got the option now to generate code in Angular or Blazor, publish to GitHub, or download zip. So I'm going to publish to GitHub to Angular and show you how this works. So I'll just say test demo is going to be my repo name, and I better say test demo 1. And I'm going to create the repository. And now this is going to go off to GitHub, create this repo, and it's generating the code for this entire application, which is pretty amazing. So now it's published. I'm going to click the link here. Now I'm into GitHub. You can see if I go to source, app, here's all of my pages. So if I go here to another page, here's the TypeScript. This is all the code that we've generated. You notice here that it's subscribing to these services that we actually generated. So if I go to app services, I've got demo data source, I've got the Northwind data source, my OpenAPI data source, and these are all hitting endpoints that are in the cloud. So this code is generated. It'll pass the sniff test. So if you're worried about what type of code this is actually creating, we've had like major big companies and super senior architects say, hey, this is as good as code that I would actually write or my team would write. So now what I can do is just copy this, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code right here. And in code, I'm going to do Control-Shift-P. I'm going to clone this repo like so, and I'll go down to my dev folder, and this will, dev, select the repository location. It's cloning that guy. I'm going to open it up, and there we go. I've got all my code sitting here inside of Visual Studio Code that I can now work with even through GitHub. So let's open up a new terminal window. Let's do an npm, we'll do an npm install. And now at the same time, this always takes a while. I'm going to go back to the app builder here, and I am going to change this to Blazor, and I am going to download a zip file with Blazor, and I am going to open this guy up. I'm going to extract all and close that. I'm going to open this guy up with Visual Studio 2022. It's on my other screen. I'll move it over. There we go. And here it's the same thing. If I go to Pages, here is data bound view. We've got all of our grid definition. You've got our data source. If I go to other pages like dashboards, or another page, actually, the one that has a little bit more complexity, you can see here that I've got all the data binding. All of this is connecting to the cloud, treating it just like services, etc. So it's generating all of the correct code that you would use in your application. So if I do an ng serve here on this guy, it's going to compile, and this will take a second. And in the meantime, make sure that if you have questions, you're entering them into the chat. We will get to everything. And this is generating the bundles. And this always takes a second if you've done work here in Angular. Blazor's a little bit quicker. But here we go. And now it's opening up the application. And now I can click my screens, and you'll see that I've got my grids here, and I've got the pages. Oh, that's a little funky. Looks like something went wrong there. Maybe I need to check a CSS setting, but we'll look at that after the webinar. But you can see here that I got all my data. I've got all of the data in the grid. I've got all of the data in the card views, and just like that, we've got all of the data binding, everything taken care of for us just by using the app builder. So with that, let's go back to our slides here and wrap this up. So the call to action, get app builder today. Hopefully you saw the value of this today in this demo on how you can take data from the cloud and bind it to applications, either using JSON, using Swagger with OpenAPI, and then we have all these data bound controls. I covered a few. There's a lot more, like combo boxes and other things. But we want you to get started today to start saving and getting back that 80% of your dev time that you deserve to get back to work on really what's important. So thank you again. I really appreciate your time. Luke and I both do. And we will see you at the next webinar. Thanks again.